The Nigeria Export Promotion Council says it expects a fall in the export of cocoa beans and cashew nuts this year and projects losses of about $160 million. Edward George, an independent commodities expert, now joins me from London to discuss the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on soft commodities across West Africa. Edward, always a pleasure to have you share your expertise with us on CNBC Africa. Now, as the world obviously takes a hit from falling oil prices, how much of a silver lining do soft commodities provide at this point?
Well, I think it really depends on the kind of soft commodity. If you look at something like cocoa prices have actually risen by a third over the last 18 months, and they're almost as high as they were during the peak in 2016, though not quite, around £2,000 sterling a tonne. So certainly if you are in cocoa, that suggests that you're going to make a much better return on your money then. And certainly a lot of food prices have gone up as well. The real problem here is about the distribution of goods to the market. And there are a number of cases we've already seen across West Africa where you have traders or agricultural producers with lots of food or soft commodities, and they're unable to distribute because of either curfews or lockdowns or difficulties with transports. So for every gain out there, there's losses as well. And obviously the big concern is if a lot of this production cannot get to market, then it will rot and waste away and no one will get any money for it.
Now, Edward, amidst fears of a resurgence of coronavirus in countries or cities where they had until now achieved some measure of success as far as containment is concerned, talks of renewed lockdown measures are already in the works. And when you say distribution is a problem, it doesn't look like that's going away anytime soon. How do you reckon countries can provide shock absorbers or soft landings for a problem such as distribution within lockdown restrictions?
Well, absolutely. And the interesting thing is lockdown, it really varies what you mean by that. Across a lot of Africa, lockdown actually means curfew. They're really stopping people going out at night, which is when they think most of the virus could be spread. And they're also recognizing for a lot of people, working from home is not a possibility. If you're a cleaning lady, a taxi driver, a builder, you cannot work from home, simply. And even for many professionals, there's difficulty with that. So I think there's a recognition that there are different ways that you bring in the lockdown. But I have seen quite a bit of innovation. I've seen a lot of taxi and tuk-tuk and boda drivers who are now delivering food instead of people. And we've seen huge efforts by huge companies like Jumia to try and improve the ability to distribute food digitally, even using simple mobile phones with USSD codes. So it really is a question of looking at the very elaborate transport and distribution network out there, a lot of it informal, and thinking how can we rejig this so that the food can continue flowing and goods continue to be exchanged.
And what will this mean for prices going forward?
Well, look, a lot depends on what we're talking about. In the case of cocoa, I think we could see cocoa prices rising further. We've just had a very good season in West Africa, and when the COVID epidemic hit was probably the best time, if you could call it that, because the main crop was practically over and there was a gap anyway before the light crop. The real concern is if there is big disruption to the cocoa growing areas, the cocoa can't get out. And also, if a lot of the seasonal laborers who come from, let's say, Guinea or Burkina Faso are not allowed to travel into the country, we could see a real impact for the next season. So certainly I would expect jittery markets to push up cocoa prices going forward. I think also for a lot of the imported foodstuffs, rice and anything wheat-based, I think we're going to see that increasing in price. But when it comes to the staples of West Africa, yams, cassava, it just really is about if the local distribution networks can continue to get the food to the people.
Now, just before the COVID-19 season, Edward, you'll remember that conversations across cocoa exporting countries in West Africa especially were bordering on premiumization, upping the prices of their exports and making sure invariably that the lives of the farmers actually do improve from the work that they do on the farms for cocoa. Now, given all of these realities that the world is having to deal with now, including cocoa exporting countries, what will this mean for the living income differential?
Well, the living income differential was introduced this year, and the idea is that it adds an additional $400 per tonne onto the cost of cocoa. This is paid for by the exporters or by the chocolate makers, and then that money is supposed to go direct to the farmer and significantly increase their income and give them the ability to live off it. The problem is that there's a lot of uncertainty about exactly how this money will be used. My understanding is that Côte d'Ivoire is going to use it to prop up the farm gate price next season. So if farmers go and sell their cocoa, they're guaranteed to get a higher price. They get that $400. But there is so little transparency about it. It's very unclear exactly where that money is now, if it is actually being paid, and how it will be distributed. And of course, this desire to up the cost of exports, provided you can export. I think the key here is about the speciality market. If you take coffee, for example, from Africa, it's not really a huge volume producer, but it is very much a speciality producer. If you take the case of Côte d'Ivoire, they export most of their coffee to markets like in the Mediterranean. It might be Algeria, it might be Spain, Italy, where they like that kind of slightly bitter brand of coffee bean from Côte d'Ivoire. So I think if the African markets can keep their niche markets, then they will be able to make a better premium on the products they export.